and I will fight. I will fight anyone who says 2022 was a bad year for games. There were at least 10 good games that came out this year.
Top 10 games of 2022, sponsored by CuriosityStream.
It was a weird year, I admit. A lot of big games got shuffled out. We still don't have Zelda or Silksong. The New Horizon continued its trend of releasing simultaneously with one of the best games ever made. But that room in the schedule was more than made up for by a suite of obscenely well-made indies, games that are really honed to a razor's edge. And look, I played a lot of stuff this year. At the time of writing this, I've rolled credits on 50 games in the calendar year 2022. That's not including games I replayed or the several battle passes I worked through in Fortnite. Also, in case you're going to yell at me for not including something, check out this list, and then don't yell at me anyway.
Good job, you did it. Good job. 3, 2, 1.
I've actually talked about most of these on the Min-Max podcast. Did you know I'm on a podcast? Min-Max.
It's a game that dares to ask, what if both your arms were baseball bats?
It was my favorite gaming podcast before I was regularly featured, and I still listen to it every week that I'm not on. There's a playlist in the description. Anyway, I've talked about these games as they came out, but the value of a year-end list, for me at least, is my oft-stated theory that the best games are the ones that live in your memory for the longest. So the following games, the results of an incomplete sample and barely in order, are that. My attempt to remember and catalog my favorite experiences this year and throw them into a numbered list. There's also a whole separate list that will include my favorite movies and books and honorable mention games. You can watch that exclusively on Nebula after this, but that's enough hedging. Let's jump into it. If you're a fan of grimy sci-fi meditations on capitalism and the gig economy and also video games, 2022 was a pretty damn good year for you. Norco, a point-and-click adventure/detective story, is one of my favorite kinds of science fiction, and that it feels set about 5 minutes in the future. Robots are around, AIs are kind of a thing, but the extent to which any of these things have changed, let alone improved day-to-day life for the characters, is up for debate. In practice, the things you do in Norco are often very pedestrian, even when your goals are something like invade a cult of men whose names are all Garrett. But through that pedestrianness, the game grounds itself in the messy realism of its protagonists. Norco is often a shockingly beautiful game with smoggy sunsets and evocative music and genuinely moving pieces of writing. It's also a game where a detective admits that he missed a crucial suspect because he has IBS and then says, "You gotta have a clean ass to fight crime, everyone knows that." On that note, Norco actually feels remarkably similar to Hideo Kojima's 1988 detective game Snatcher. Both have quirky, holistic portraits of future cities, both are often very funny, both have occasionally obtuse puzzles. The difference between the two maybe says as much about their eras of development as it does about the developers. Norco is harder-edged, more cynical, less conclusive, but it's also capable of an intimacy that Snatcher never quite reaches, born of a connection to the land and the people of Neo-Louisiana. Despite being set in the future, Norco is an incredibly 2022 game. The thing about Signalis, more so than its horror or its cool PS1 aesthetic, is that it's ambitious. It's ambitious on a thematic level in a way I feel like we rarely see anymore, where not only has there obviously been a ton of thought put into the overarching narrative, but every piece of it, every puzzle solution, every boss, every scrap of paper you find on the ground is demonstrating some metaphor or parallel or symbolism. It is a massively dense game, one that takes 8 hours to beat, but far more than that to untangle. It builds the type of world where the basements have basements. But even if you don't get Signalis on first pass, and I don't think many of us will, what it still conveys is utter confidence in its choices. The cutscenes are just a lot, with so many contrasting styles and flashes of clarity obscured by mountains of other information, and the music really hits throughout the whole thing. One of my favorite bits, even though I have not at all figured out what it means, is there's this recurring motif of this space intentionally left blank. Like it flashes that on the screen at you, and that phrase feels so ominous amidst everything else the game is doing. Just this space intentionally left blank. It does stumble into some of the more frustrating elements of the genre as well, some puzzles and a lot of inventory management, but I am so excited to see what other people do with Signalis, because more than anything, it's a game that begs to be pulled apart. There were a couple games this year that had, wow, I've never done that before moments, but none half as much as The Last Clockwinder. This is a VR game about automation, but rather than setting up conveyor belts or other machinery, you're automating yourself. Say you've got an apple tree, and that tree grows apples every 10 seconds. You could stand there yourself and pick the apples as they show up, taking them off the branch and putting them in a basket. Or, in The Last Clockwinder, you could record your picking motion on a 10-second loop and then set an automaton to take your place, your motion and results perfectly replicated every time. But then, see, there's an apple tree across the room, so you set another automaton to pick from that tree as well, but the fruit basket is over by the first one, so you pick both apples and you toss them towards the first one, and then you go over and re-record the original loop. So instead of simply picking apples, your first automaton picks 2 fruits, puts them in the basket, turns and catches the 2 that the second automaton has tossed and drops those in the basket as well. But then there's a third tree. You see how this could get complicated very fast, and it does, but always in a way that's manageable, because you yourself are every part of the machine. You've worked every part of the line to set it all up. Do you remember that scene from the original Fantasia with Mickey and the broomsticks? That's effectively what this game offers you the chance to do, and it's both amazing and a little uncanny to look down at a room full of a dozen mechanized yous that are all moving in ways that are recognizably you. And one of my favorite bits of The Last Clockwinder is it becomes a sort of effortless commentary on the difficulties of automating human behavior. Inevitably, I would realize one of my recorded selves was a little awkward. I didn't throw the fruit well, I picked the apples less than perfectly, and I would have to decide if I wanted to start the whole automated chain again or simply work around the awkward movement, improvising fixes that would, of course, create even more problems later on. The Last Clockwinder's scale stays far smaller than something like Factorio or Infinifactory. Because of how involved the setup is, it basically never grows beyond the size of a room. But within its rooms, what it's doing is absolutely wonderfully unique. I really hope the developers continue to play with this concept, because The Last Clockwinder feels like it's only scratching the surface of what's possible. Some games surprise you. I might watch a trailer, think nothing of it, then only through word of mouth hear that a game is actually worth another look. And then there are games like Neon White. Immediately, Neon White presented itself as one of the flashiest, coolest looking, most machine girl scored games of the year, and it does not drop that mantle for a second. The game is style as substance, and its first-person platforming, card-shuffling, shooter genre invention is more than just an excuse to show off some truly rad graphic design. There are a half dozen video essays on how this game teaches you to speedrun, and they're all correct. There are presumably 5 million pieces of fan art for each character, and they're all deserved. And in this final year-end discussion, I am also here to stick up for its story. Partially, I think Neon White's gameplay is so fun that people lose patience for the visual novel sections that break up the speedrunning. And that's fair, and you unlock plenty of marathon modes after the game finishes to skip right to it. But I've seen so many takes talking about how uncool the characters of this game are, and I just have to say, you think Neon White doesn't know that? You think they did that by accident? There's this section of the Polygon review that I like that goes, White and his found family of other damned souls are truly wonderfully cringe. White is an unabashed sword weeb, Violet belts out karaoke renditions of My Chemical Romance. No one wears fewer than 3 belts. The characters of Neon White aren't supposed to be cool. They're posturing, insecure dorks. And the joy of the story is helping them gradually drop the mask. That really sums up my feelings here, probably because I wrote that review. Of course it's cringe. We're all cringe. It's 2022. Get over it. Aim for the heavens. 9 years ago, when the Stanley Parable first released, it was immediately one of those games. A game that was as fun to write and talk about as it was to play. A whole big, silly meta-narrative on choice and storytelling and agency within the limitless and incredibly limited medium of video games. It's also one of those experiences that is essentially one bit, and once you know the bit, that's kind of it. Stanley Parable was never a game that I really returned to, and so the somewhat confusing development of the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe Edition as an expansion, a remaster, DLC, wasn't something I was eagerly awaiting. But boy, was I wrong! The most important thing the Ultra Deluxe Edition does for the Stanley Parable experience is just expand the bit. The game is so much wider and so much weirder than it was 9 years ago. There is, to be clear, an entire new game's worth of content in this thing, and the new stuff is hilariously reflective and self-aware as you would imagine, but also unexpected and abstract and sometimes really deeply ominous. What I never expected to say to you in 2022 is that I enjoyed playing this version of the Stanley Parable more than I enjoyed the original in 2013, and now I already knew the bit. If the original is many variations on one very solid joke, the Ultra Deluxe Edition is less concerned with the punchline and more interested in what happens to a setup when it's tortured into 1,000 different versions of itself. And also there's this bucket. Hey, do you like haunted houses? Do you? Do you like representations of our precarious position on the planet and with each other? Well, check this out. Yes, I admit, this isn't about games specifically. Earlier this year, I commissioned the incredible artist Kaylee Rowena to draw a haunted house for me, and she freaking delivered, and now you can buy it too. This poster is on sale at my merch link in the description. It is so cool. There you can also find this hat, which isn't afraid to tell the truth, namely that fish fear me and I fear everything. You can find this mug telling everyone that you think about it a lot while cracked in the exact pattern of Andre Serrano's Piss Christ for no particular reason. There are patches and pins too. Hanukkah is late this year. You still have time. Anyway, I played some lengthy games this year. Giant open world, sprawling narratives, far too much Fortnite. But at the beginning of 2022, I never would have guessed that I would pour dozens and dozens and dozens of hours into a game like Vampire Survivors. This game could and might take over the world. Vampire Survivors' tagline is "Be the bullet hell," which is a catchy and pretty apt description. It is a game built out of exponential power escalation, where single whips and fireballs turn into a screen-filling, bitrate demolishing spectacle within the span of 30 minutes. And that 30-minute time limit is part of the reason why I spent so much time with Vampire Survivors. Almost every day, I would hop on my exercise bike and play a round of this game while pedaling away, guaranteed to have a breezy time with still enough variety to keep me coming back. One of the best parts of my experience with Vampire Survivors was that I started playing in its early access period, and the game updated near constantly. New characters, new weapons, new achievements to chase. Vampire Survivors does not have a lofty narrative, but what it does have is a series of immensely satisfying mechanics that build on each other and allow different permutations on the same amazing formula over and over and over. And can we talk about how amazing it is that this game is not predatorily monetized? It's a low bar, I know, but when every other aspect of its design resembles the world's best slot machine, I do feel like I have to give it credit for costing one amount of money once. And also, one of the secret characters is a tree. I do have to say, from this point on, any of these games could be my game of the year. Easily could be. I've had an incredibly hard time deciding on an order, and I reserve the right to change my mind at any point. All of them get trophies in my heart. You know, it is kind of incredible to go back to Her Story, Sam Barlow's first experimental project with FMV video clips, because Her Story is a great game, but it's also a game that consists entirely of one actor sitting in one room for a few hours, and then jump forward a couple years and out comes Immortality, a game that is effectively 3 full movies, sets, costumes, film styles, crew members, music, makeup for 3 full separate movies. I am obsessed with the idea of blank check games, shout out to Griffin and David, games where it seems like developers get to spend a lot of money on whatever incredibly specific things they want. And although Immortality does not have the biggest game budget at all, I can't help but look at this game and be astonished that they were able to create this volume of footage at such a consistently high level of quality. I want more developers to be able to think of an idea for a game as weird as Immortality and then be able to actually go and make it. You might notice that I'm not talking so much about the game itself. That's partially because I just released a video going into all my very emotional emotions about it. But what I didn't say about Immortality in that video that I'll say here is I haven't had this much fun conferring with friends about a game in ages. Playing Immortality alone is an experience that kind of makes you feel like you're losing your mind, and talking to other people about it doesn't make you feel not like that, but it will inevitably reveal that your friend is also losing their mind and probably in an entirely different direction than you. I said on MinMax a while ago that this might be the most mature game ever made, and even though it has lots of adult content, I more so mean that this game basically requires a book club to pull apart. I think I'd find this game absolutely impenetrable as a kid, and I kind of love that about it now. It feels strange to say about one of the biggest AAA releases of 2022, but I don't think any game surprised me this year as much as God of War Ragnarok. As someone who both really likes the old games and is fairly disenchanted with dad narratives, I was not really a fan of 2018's reboot. It felt a little predictable, a little monotonous, an effort to be mature that just didn't work for me, in my opinion. So with all that said, I am so happy to report that Ragnarok knocked my freaking socks off. What's interesting about this difference in enjoyment between the two games is not that much has changed. It's still the prestige-y, behind-the-shoulder viewpoint. Kratos still has very serious thoughts and conversations about fatherhood. You still have to ring 3 bells to open a chest to get a new set of gloves. But the difference in the narrative here, where the characters end up versus where they started, is just kind of remarkable. Ragnarok is an enormous game full of so many varied relationships and landscapes and twists and turns, and so many of those choices work. What I consistently admired about the game is its ability to zag when you expect it to zig, make decisions that undercut your expectations of what might happen next. I mean, Odin, the Allfather, played essentially like an old Jew. Incredible. Every interaction with Thor is an A+. Heimdall? Whew, buddy. Also, man, did I enjoy the combat here. It is a true credit to the game that I spent probably a dozen hours working on just optional endgame bosses and found it more fun than frustrating. But the best thing about the game is it delivered what I didn't get from 2018, an arc from Kratos that feels tough and thoughtful and earned. The realization of what the game is ultimately about, a realization that comes something like 35 hours in, hits like a goddamn truck. It's not just dad stuff. It goes so far beyond. The second entry in our list of this year's fantastic games about sci-fi gig economy dystopias has arrived. It's Citizen Sleeper, and it's f***ing stunning. Whereas Norco is a more traditional adventure title with few ways to game over, Citizen Sleeper pairs its beautiful prose and world construction with a relentless series of gameplay timers that constantly push you to the brink of desperation. Your hunger ticks down, your money ticks down, your ability to even function within your body ticks down, and through these countdown clocks, this forced lack of stability, Citizen Sleeper makes your choices feel painfully meaningful. I missed out on things I cared about because I needed to work or eat or run from debt collectors. And yet, because of how harsh the world is, moments of compassion in Citizen Sleeper are amongst the warmest I've seen in years. The characters in this game are so well written. The art is so good. The soundtrack is probably my most listened to album this year. I started playing Citizen Sleeper on May 13th at 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep and figured I might as well get a start on this new game I had been meaning to try. And I am not a marathon gamer. I do not tend to play things in long sessions. But I barely moved until I finished that game. I finished it on May 13th and it is not short. It just casts that kind of spell. One wonderful thing about the game is its approach to endings. There are many, and they are relatively clearly marked, and they all represent different paths your character could ultimately walk down. And I ran across virtually all of them over the course of my playthrough, and each time I thought, I don't think this is the one for me. And then the final opportunity it gave me was also the one I realized I wanted most, and I was able to be sent off by the game in exactly the way I needed. Its spell over me broken in a way that still felt magical. I truly adore Citizen Sleeper. It is a special game, and maybe the one on this list I want you to try most if you haven't. Sometimes when a thing is really, really incredibly good, you can find yourself talking about the negatives more, just because that's the more interesting point of discussion. For example, I love replaying the Souls games, and those replays are typically where I really nail down my fascination and understanding of their world structure. However, when your game is potentially hundreds of hours long, replays get more unwieldy and the world gets harder to hold in your head at once. Or the fact that there are probably too many spells for non-magic users, or that sometimes bosses get repeated, or blah, blah, blah. But here's the long and the short of it. There's only one game this year that I thought over and over while I was playing it, this is one of the best games I've ever played. And that's Elden Ring. Elden Ring does so many things so well, so effortlessly, that I find it hard to even nail down what that je ne sais quoi is. Maybe it's the amount of time spent tiptoeing along the crumbling edges of vast pieces of architecture, every step feeling like you're finding your own path. Or maybe it's the sky painted red when you emerge from a long journey underground, or a falling star streaking across the map, or the fifth massive city you find after you were sure you had seen all the game had to offer. Maybe it's the underground cosmos, or maybe it's the decaying noble animal you find there. Maybe it's the turtle pope, or the tiny horse, or the stranger you summon that kamehamehas a boss into oblivion. When I was a kid, I'd daydream about what I wanted games to be in the future. What if in Zelda you could also do this? What if this game never stopped making bosses? What if what I thought was the end had barely scratched the surface? And Elden Ring is effectively that game I was daydreaming about. Elden Ring is such a monumental achievement that it kind of feels like it comes from another dimension of development, where the ability to create is uninhibited by all the factors in our world that hold it back. What more can I say? It's a game where you can wield a massive pizza cutter and use it to cut through some primal dragon god. Personally, I think it's very good. What a year, huh? Good, bad, weird, a continued slide towards entropy. I do have to say, though, that I am happy. I'm genuinely happy, and that's due in huge part to being able to do stuff like this. This became my full-time job this year, and it's the support of the patrons and community members and Discord moderators and friendly co-workers and everything that's made it possible. This year started with the cold, swung through a whole mad scientist arc, read through almost all of Zelda, plunged underwater. I have a couple ideas for next year. I think we're gonna get into some wacky stuff. But most of all, I am just grateful to have the opportunity to talk about whatever fascinating idea gets stuck in my brain. And speaking of, there are more games than this that came out this year. More importantly, I saw one of my favorite movies maybe ever this year, and read possibly my new favorite book, and watched one of the best seasons of television maybe ever made. This and more I've put up on Nebula in a video that's chock full of recommendations and thoughts and all that stuff too disorganized for this main video. Nebula is a streaming platform that I am constantly putting extra videos on. If you sign up now, you'll get access to every exclusive I've ever put up there, and everything I'll upload next year too, early, extended, uncensored. And hey, listen, I know you've heard me talk about this before, but there is a holiday sale going on right now, meaning that it's even cheaper than normal. Sign up right now and it is less than $1 a month. Think about if you'd even notice $1 fewer a month. And then think about if you'd notice hours of exclusive stuff from me and other excellent creators. And you also, of course, get Curiosity Stream, so you can pair my exclusives with countless fun and thoughtful documentaries. This is the best deal you're ever going to find on these services, and these services are legitimately the best deal in the game if you like this thing that I do. Buy yourself a year of bonus videos from me, and hear all my thoughts on RRR, Bayonetta, Severance, and more by following that link in the description.
Good job, you did it. Good job. 3, 2, 1. Good job, you made it to the bottom of the mind control facility. You jumped on the catwalk. You should have been careful. You should have been careful. It used to be a bug, but now it's an ending. Now it's an ending. I believe in you, I believe in your ability to cross this barrier and chase your dreams. But railings don't mean anything. Good job, you did it. 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 Good job, you did it.